Okay, guys, so if you don't mind, I'll start because I think we're a bit late on the schedule, right? So we can still grab some beers in the bar afterwards. So maybe let's just wait a few seconds till everybody sits down. Yeah, so the idea today is just to talk about what I call the best kept secrets, or maybe things that not all of you use or know. And the things that became kind of popular over the last year. So the best kept secrets for 2019, GraphQL, maybe not such a big secret anymore. I know how many of you guys use it, maybe like a show of hands, like everyday work. Okay, so there's like 8 people. And did any of you guys hear about Prisma? Or, you know, what? Okay, so there's more people than I thought. That's kind of a similar thing, you know. Yeah, so the gist today, what I'm gonna talk about is just like the current state of JavaScript, what we're in right now, why use GraphQL for the ones who, you know, don't use it or don't know much about it. Maybe I'll just do like a quick intro on what is it and what are the features. Then why Prisma, what is it, and end up with a short demo of Prisma. So for those who don't know me, I'm Domas Bitvinskas, and I'm a startup fanatic and a co-founder of a business transparency startup, Honestive. And over the last year, I was also working as a freelance developer exclusively with React, GraphQL, and Prisma stack. So I've got to kind of preface all of this, that this talk, you know, like of the future of JavaScript and stuff like that is just like my own subjective opinion. I don't claim to be an expert of, you know, what is the future of JavaScript or stuff like that. And, you know, hopefully all of you are gonna like learn something interesting, maybe take something home. And so let's try to look what happened over the last year. So over the 2018, everybody started using ES6. You know, you're using Babel or any other transpiler, and this is like the new default. Angular is kind of going on the downward spiral. Sorry for all the Angular developers that I might hurt. But yeah, I think that's kind of the honest truth. Vue is kind of growing quickly. A lot of people kind of moving from Angular to Vue. And I think it's pretty cool, the whole framework and the whole community, how it's growing so quickly. React is still the king in the front-end library space, and a lot of like great features and interesting things with hooks and suspense came out over the last year. We can now use TensorFlow in the browser. I think this is pretty cool and maybe not used widely yet, but I think we're going to see more of that over the next year. Then a lot of people started using TypeScript and Flow, and I think that's a good direction. It still has some problems. You know, it's not really easy to use Flow or TypeScript. It's a bit convoluted, but it's getting better. And I think it's a great way forward. So we'll see over the next year if it will get better. For the ones who skipped the promises train, so now they're dead. Everybody's using async and await. Congratulations, Danielus. And now we can just go to the good stuff. And the list wouldn't be complete without GraphQL. And in my mind, GraphQL is like the most important, I don't know, innovation in the web design world over the last few years. And it really enables developers to build more, you know, with like spending less time and become much more effective and independent as developers. And it is pretty cool, you know, GraphQL. And so for those of you who don't really know why we should be using GraphQL and why, like, what is it? And so GraphQL is a query language that your client or front end speaks to the backend, and it's kind of, a lot of people don't like to call it that way, but it's more like a replacement of the current like REST paradigm that we had. So with GraphQL, you don't need to overfetch the data in your front end. You can only fetch what you need. So if I'm rendering a list of posts, I can specify in my API query to the backend that I only need the title and author, and I don't need all the other attributes that might be used somewhere elsewhere, in the app. So I think that's kind of a good improvement. In the component era of React and Vue that we're living right now, GraphQL, I think, plays a really nice role with batch queries, where you can have multiple React components, for example, querying their own data in different places on the app. And while in practice it wouldn't be like a good idea to do 100 requests from 100 different components on page load to a backend server. So with batch queries, all of this can be merged into one root query, and it can be all sent in one go and kind of returned and then passed down to the children. So I think that's pretty interesting. And also there's schema stitching, so you can have multiple GraphQL servers kind of responsible for different parts of your app architecture, and you can stitch all of the schemas into one GraphQL schema and then query that schema as if it was just one server. So that's in general all of these improvements, and there's way more things that you can look into later on, but I think it's way better developer experience than we had with REST, and I think it will just only get better. And it's the whole ecosystem is building around it, and it's getting maybe 2 or 3 years. It was pretty hard to set up your GraphQL server, and there was not so much support from libraries, and you had to kind of mingle with these types and kind of try to do a lot of things the hard way. But now the GraphQL setup is pretty simple. If you're doing it in JavaScript or Node, you usually have some kind of schema file which defines what kind of queries can you do to this GraphQL server. So in this example, you can do posts query, which will return an array of posts, and you can query for a single post, which will just return this single post. And there's a different definition that a post has an ID and a title. So this is more like what can this server do, and kind of what are the types of things that it can do. And the actual juice of what's happening in that server is defined in your resolvers file, which actually take those parts of your schema and resolve it with some kind of result. So this is how it usually looks like. And it looks actually pretty simple. And you might think, cool, so where's the problem? Why do we need this Prisma thing? And why is it useful? Can we just do this resolvers thingy? And it's actually for simple app, you probably don't really worry that much, about if my resolvers are clean enough and stuff like that. But once you have a few more relation tables in your database, and you have to kind of resolve different parts of the relations through your resolvers, it kind of starts to get a bit messy. There's no real standard of how messy your resolver should be yet. And even for a simple app, we have just a few models. When they're interconnected, it starts to get pretty messy. So for simple resolvers, you can just use something like Sequelize, and you get it pretty simple. But if there's some kind of dependency on a relation, so for example, one service has many stats reports, then you have to mingle with your params. How do I know when to include my do my include queries and stuff like that. So this is even the easier way with Sequelize, but you can imagine how here it becomes if you use just raw SQL or anything like that. So this is where this Prisma comes in, and I'm really passionate about Prisma. So Prisma is a data layer that replaces that traditional ORM, that Sequelize or whatever you're using, in your architecture of the app. And it's an open source library. It's I know how many of you guys heard about GraphQL. It was like a backend as service. Okay, so there's some people. So it was like a backend as service product built by the same people who are building Prisma, and this team is just like crazy of how much good tools can be like feed to the GraphQL ecosystem as a whole. So they are like the same people that built GraphQL Yoga, if anybody used it before. So Prisma is the data layer, yeah. And instead of having like a regular structure, we have a client. It might be like a browser. You have an API server that might run GraphQL, and your API server then uses SQLize or raw SQL to fetch the data from the database and then return it to the client. Instead of that, you add another layer to your application stack that is a Prisma server, and then this Prisma server then acts as a database proxy. So instead of querying database directly, you query Prisma, and then Prisma queries a database for you. And you might think, why overcomplicate my app like that, but I feel that it solves a lot of problems, and it just like makes the whole app architecture much simpler. So it allows you to interact with the database the same way you communicate with your GraphQL server. So when you're talking to Prisma server from your backend, you're not writing SQL queries. You're not like doing SQLize or anything like that. You're just like you can actually talk with just plain GraphQL. You define your database tables as GraphQL schema, and you get free CRUD. So maybe this looks a bit unclear why we should do Prisma. So I'll show a quick demo of a simple Prisma service. So I think I'm gonna mirror. Okay. So you install Prisma just by doing npm install Prisma, and then you can to create a new Prisma server. You do Prisma init and name the Prisma server something, and hopefully it will not take a long time. So then it will ask you what server are we planning to deploy this service. So I'm gonna touch up a bit more about the deployment of Prisma, but for now we'll just deploy to a demo server that is hosted by the Prisma guys themselves. And we won't generate the Prisma client yet. I'll show you later on what it does. So now we have this Prisma test 10 thingy, and I hope it's big enough. So now we got just two files. That is data model Prisma and Prisma YAML. So Prisma YAML is just a file that knows the endpoint that we will deploy this Prisma service to, and a data model that is the model that will be recreated on the data tables in the underlying database. So basically, if I add a field here, something called like secret or something like that, it will, when I deploy this service, it will also add this field to the database. And this way, we can also do like create more tables. Maybe we're gonna create a post that has a title, and a post has an author that is a user, and a user has many posts. And now when I deploy this service. I can deploy just like Prisma deploy. It will create all of these tables for us on like when it's deployed. And when we change something, we again run Prisma deploy, and it will change it. And now it gives us this URL. That is the, I don't know if any of you guys know about this Prisma playground, but it's just like a simple demo client for Prisma. And now we have a GraphQL server running that is running on top of our database, and that database has a model, has a user model and a post model. So if we check the schema now, we can see that we have multiple mutations. We have, maybe in the docs it will be simpler, the queries. We can do users query, we can do posts query, we can query for a single user. We can do mutations here. We can also do subscriptions. So if a certain node was changed or touched or whatever, we can trigger something. And underneath it all, it's using MySQL, but it can use Postgres, or MongoDB with embedded types, stuff like that. And yeah, so now we can query, for example, for our users. And it doesn't have any users right now. Maybe we can create a user. And this create user was just like generated automatically from our data model file. I did nothing else. So all of these, like create, update user, create post. Now we can create a user, for example, with a name, I don't know, John, and a secret, whatever. So basically now it created the user. Now I can query the users. I can query the posts of the user. It obviously doesn't have any posts, but if it had, it would show up, and stuff like that. And there's like a really nice API how to create all of those things, And this CRUD is like automatic. So you might be thinking, so what I'm seeing here, like now everybody who has access to this URL can, create or edit models in my database, or like do pretty much anything, So obviously you are not using, this Prisma server directly from your client. What you usually do is instead of doing something like this, instead of doing straight from the client to the Prisma server that is authenticated to do basically anything with the database, you have an API server in between that has a Prisma client, and only this client has the secret, or the token to your Prisma server. And nobody else who don't have the token cannot actually call your Prisma server. So now I'll show you an example of what a more like real world scenario would look like if you're using something like Apollo server or GraphQL Yoga. So I'm gonna copy an empty Apollo server folder. Has a lot of node modules probably, so and yeah, and now all we have is just basically an empty repository that has Apollo server and an index file. So it's just like an example GraphQL server. It doesn't know anything about Prisma or whatever. So for those of you who haven't touched GraphQL or haven't tried building GraphQL servers in Node, so this is how it usually looks like. There's like type defs, there's resolvers, there's configuration, and you started the server, and that's it. So now it has just one resolver and one type, hello, So now if we run the server, it will show in the schema that I can only query for this hello string, or hello query. And if I do hello, it will return world, just because we are returning world here. And now it doesn't have like any concept of database or whatever. So now to add Prisma, we do the same thing we did before. We just do Prisma init and whatever service name. And again, we deploy it on the demo server. And just this time, we generate a JavaScript client which will allow us to query this, Prisma server more simply. So now it says generated it here. And now it's basically just the same story. We have a data model that is empty. We have a Prisma file that has the same endpoint data model, and it added this JavaScript client thingy. And this JavaScript client thingy is going to be run on every deploy. So now, for example, if I do Prisma deploy, it will not only deploy it to this, so it has duplicate data, but it will not only deploy it to that space, but it will also generate a model, or it will also generate a Prisma client that knows that it has a user model, and it knows that it can do create user, update user, upsert user, and stuff like that. And now we can import this Prisma client here. I think it was Prisma generated client. Yeah, and now we can, for example, query for all of the users. So we can have a users a users query, and we resolve it with Prisma just users. So there's two ways to do it. So without this Prisma client, we could just basically write a GraphQL query which would resolve this users and send it to the Prisma server. But with this Prisma client, it gives you what they call a fluid API, where you can do Prisma user posts and kind of do, I don't know, where the title, length is something like that. So it gives you a lot of these. Basically, it translates this GraphQL query thingy into a binding for the language you're using. So in this case, we're using JavaScript. So it gives you a JavaScript kind of way to call this. They also have clients for Go, for TypeScript, and Flow. So in this case, we just call the users here. And now if I restart the server, this user's endpoint should, I type user or not? OK, so we have to define a user type here and define what properties can I expose to the outside world. So maybe I'll expose name, but not expose, but we'll keep the secret field that we had before still in the just in the database. So now we have this running, and now if I check the schema, I can see, I can now call users here. So if I do users ID, now I can call users here. And it will not allow me to call anything else because this is the only things that I've defined in my type defs for the server, for the GraphQL server. So, so where it mostly helps is if you want to do want to transform the args of your GraphQL engine to the database structure that you have underneath. Because like if you're just like returning collections just like that, it's pretty much like you can do it with whatever way you want. You can just like do raw SQL. So this Prisma really shines when you want to do something a bit more complex. If you want to, I don't know, just like query a user by certain ID. So now instead of an empty args array, we can get args here, and we just do Prisma user ID args ID, and now we can query a single user with certain ID. So for example, this ID, I can also do ID equals this thingy, and I can find the name for it. Yeah, so basically this is what Prisma helps with, you know, and I know how much time we have left, but I can either go into relations or we can either go into questions and stuff like that. So yeah, so Prisma supports Postgres, MySQL, and Mongo. It also has clients for JavaScript, TypeScript, and Flow and Go. And it doesn't have any lock-in, so you can deploy this Prisma server anywhere where you can deploy Docker. So there's like integrations with Heroku that's kind of like just click through. And they have their own paid hosting called Prisma Cloud, where they host it for you, and it also has like some additional features where it helps track your releases and kind of has a database viewer kind of helpers and stuff like that, and yeah, so I think in short version, so Prisma just makes it easy to develop easy and great GraphQL APIs, and in 2018, I think GraphQL will just grow and grow, and Prisma will grow kind of as a remedy for all of this like GraphQL mess that we're gonna have. So basically, this is it. And if you have any questions, let me know and let's figure out. Yeah.
What about more complex migrations rather than just adding the field, but maybe manipulating the existing ones and stuff like that?
Yeah, so with migrations, it's actually a good question because migrations are not like so well solved as they are with something like I don't know, active record in Rails or something like that, where we have like time-stamped migrations. So in GraphQL and Prisma way, the migrations are kind of do it by hand a lot of the times. So you can add fields, add relations, change it, but it doesn't have like a stamped way for it, So you have to use GraphQL directives to set defaults, or to kind of rename the fields. And then after you deploy the service, then you have to do basically just delete those directives from your schema file again. So it's not like a great experience, but these guys are still working on it. So it's like, maybe I didn't say, but it's like a kind of young project. I think it's like out of beta for the last half a year only, But I think the progress is really good. So yeah. So hopefully I didn't confuse a lot of you guys, with all of this, because I think maybe the demo didn't really show, why should you use Prisma and so on, but I think it kind of solves a lot of problems, if you are working with Node and GraphQL in general.
And what about debugging? If my queries run slow, and can I find out why?
You mean if your queries run slow?
Yeah, is it like a problem with my database structure or something like that?
Yeah, so they definitely have like logging, and if there's some kind of error that's not at the JavaScript level, but so Prisma is built on Scala, you know, and it is they have like stack traces, you know, if something goes wrong beyond JavaScript level, you know, you can get the ID and kind of figure out, you know, what is actually happening, and I think the debugging experience wasn't as bad, you know, as it was. I was using GraphQL before, like more than a year ago, and using backend as a service and debugging backend as a service where everything is really like remote, you know, and you don't have real access to the machine. It's much harder than just having a Docker container running in your, you know, computer and then kind of logging into it and figuring out what's wrong. You know. So I don't think it's a problem. Okay, so yeah.
Does it support any like subscriptions or something?
Yeah, so it does support subscriptions. It is not sure how it is implemented, if it's like a database level or whatever, but it does support subscriptions. It still doesn't have full support for relation subscriptions. So if you like subscribe to a post and something on the author changes, you know, it still doesn't kind of, you know, propagate it. So you have to do a bit of manual hacking, ensuring that you touch the kind of root node, you know. But it has kind of good support for it. Pretty easy. Okay, so thank you. And